Welcome everyone to Tales from the 90's, my podcast. Thank you for checking us out here on YouTube, Facebook, or on Spotify. Join me as I go back in time to September 1994. I'm going to be just starting school in a new school in the middle school, 6th grade, so back when school started in September, so please join me. Yeah, like I said, back then school used to start in September. Now it starts early August. It's too hot for... I would have been throwing a fit if I had to go to school in August, burning alive. Half the air conditioning didn't work, if it even had air conditioning. But yeah, like I said, 6th grade was in. I know some schools, I'll get into that a little bit once I get talking about that a little bit later. But if you're new to the podcast, we go back in time, give you my experiences with everything that was going back in the 90's. I pick a random month and year from the 90's to go through. It's never linear. Like last week we were in April of 97. Now we're back to September of 94. So I would have been 10 at this time. And before we go any further, I want to mention that depending on when this comes out, if everything comes out right, tomorrow, if you're watching this when it comes out on Wednesday, we try to drop our episodes Wednesday at 9. But October 31st, we're going to have a Halloween episode. It's going to be my top 50 horror movies of all time. Now, this is just my list of horror movies. It's not like the best selling or the highest grossing or anything like that. It's just a personal list of me. So if you like some of the ones on there and agree with me, let me know. But anyway, that's for the next episode. Like I said, that's a bonus episode. Right now, we are in September 1994. And of course, if you haven't noticed from the title of this, there's the dog appearance. They'll try to make their appearance. It's kids outside. Quit. They hijack it every time. Anyway, if you haven't noticed from the name of this, it's based off of Tales from the Crypt. Of course, I'm obsessed with it. You can probably see the book in the background here. I always try to give a rundown what was going on in the Tales from the Crypt world when I do these. They were in between seasons. They had wrapped season 5, and season 1 would start next month because they started them in October. I mean, obviously, so nothing was going on there. And but season 1 of the cartoon had come out and been on TV, and they were getting ready to start season 2. Of course, the cartoon Tales from the Crypt Keeper. It was like a kid's version of it. They made the Crypt Keeper a little bit more friendlier for kids. He was green and didn't look quite like a monster. I mean, he was a cartoon monster. Back then, kids weren't that scared of things. They could have got away with it, but they didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings by having the monster pop up at 10 in the morning when little 4-year-old sitting there eating cereal probably would have spilled it all over. But, yeah, nothing really going on in the Tales from the Crypt world there in between seasons. Things are still going good. Season 4 and 5 are known as their best seasons, so it's kind of downhill from there. Not as bad as season 7, but I ended up liking them all anyway. The only real news of note, maybe in the future I could look up news from like where I was from in Cincinnati, but I don't know if that would appeal to a lot of people that are watching this that didn't grow up there. That's just maybe something I can think about for the future. But the only real news of going on was, of course, we're knee-deep in the O.J. Simpson thing. I'll probably talk about that at super length whenever we get to the month and the year when the trial ended, and I'll give all my thoughts on that. But right now, they had just finished the first phase of jury selection, which of course took forever because we got, Marcia Clark for the state as the prosecutor, and then we got, of course, Johnny Cochran and the Dream Team, as they called him, Simpson's defense counsel. And so, of course, they're going over every single jury candidate. It's like It's like people are trying to get justice, but kind of like with politics, which I will not ever go on really. Politics ends up being like, like we're gonna pick up this person for this team. They turn it into a game instead of something serious. But like I said with the jury, that took forever. Like the first phase ended in September here. But like I said, I'll get into more thoughts on O.J. Simpson later on. I want to shift gears and go into TV shows. Of course, I had already talked. My first podcast was actually from 2 months from this, November of '94. But I talked about ER debuting on NBC and how huge of a show that was. Another groundbreaking show that debuted that month, which some of you are probably going to be like, how could you not like that? I've never been a fan of Friends, but Friends debuted then too. So, I mean, if you look at NBC at the time, they debut ER and Friends, which weren't huge at first, but they would become, like, that whole Thursday night lineup, the must-see TV as they called it on NBC, that was huge. And another huge part of NBC at the time, the top-rated show, September of that year, was Seinfeld. They were in a season 6, and this was first season that Seinfeld was on top. I mean, they've been gaining, like, some of these series, it takes 5 or 6 seasons to get really in a, where you're going and you got an audience built and fans are connecting with the shows. Nowadays, they just cancel things after 1 or 2 seasons just because they didn't bring enough people in. For one, I don't want to try to get on a tangent here, but the way ratings are today and the way they were back then, completely different. And it's the same with wrestling. People try to, the ratings for this. It doesn't matter anymore. You've got streaming everywhere. People aren't watching live TV like they used to. People aren't even watching cable TV where they DVR it like they used to. There's so many streaming options and services and people watching stuff on their own time or choosing to wait until the season's over to binge watch it. So, I mean, today they don't give shows a chance. Because I guess there's really nothing to kind of rank it by. Like I said, back then, TV ratings were everything. Whether it was wrestling, whether it was TV shows. But yeah, Seinfeld, I never got into Seinfeld then. It's weird, some of these shows, a lot of these shows now that I love, like Seinfeld and ER, the Seinfeld I actually got into, my grandpa watching it in the early 2000s. I'd start watching because it always looks stupid to me. And a lot of people say it is stupid, but I never started watching it. My Bengals thing's there. The Bengals lost yesterday. That's another thing. Sorry, I kind of dovetail on different topics as I'm thinking about them, but yeah, Seinfeld. It's self-described the show about nothing. And I don't know if any of you ever watched Curb Your Enthusiasm, made by the creator of Seinfeld, Larry David. That show is insane. I obviously won't be talking much about that on here, so I just wanted to get that out of the way. But a couple other shows that were hitting their stride. Home Improvement was in season 4 on ABC. I mean, you were a kid then, or even an adult. That was one of them shows that appealed to both. Tim Allen as Tim the Toolman Taylor, and Al as partner on Tool Time, and then the kids. Of course, the girls are in love with Brad and freaking Jonathan Taylor Thomas. And of course, that show, the freaking neighbor Wilson, you didn't see his face. Just a lot of memories of that show. Yeah, it was a good show. Not too much, like I said, season 4 had started, so they were kind of in the midpoint of it. Like I said, that's kind of when the season started, or show started getting into a groove. Speaking of that, Roseanne, season 7 started on ABC. That was the season where Roseanne got pregnant. I didn't like how the series ended for Roseanne, where turns out Dan died, and then they brought it back, of course, and then we know how that one ended. I'm not going to get into any of that. It just, I almost wish they would have just left it alone, but not had Dan die. And then when they bring it back, it was a dream. I'm probably remembering some parts of that wrong. It's been forever. I used to watch that with my mom all the time. That was one of her favorite shows. Of course, that harmonica theme song at the beginning, everybody remembers that. I always found it funny when they had the version with the lyrics. Me and Josh and Travis would laugh at that. Like, we were just watching Roseanne, expecting regular, and this guy starts singing. We're like, what is this? But yeah, those are just some of the TV shows from then. Like I said, I can't go through everything in one podcast. I say that every time, just in case somebody's new to this. If anybody's ever watching, I'm talking to myself. But we're going to go into video games now. Of course, video games were huge in the 90s. I mean, they still are. I mean, video games have been big since the arcade days, before there was even home consoles. But I don't know, something just felt different about them in the 90s. I'm sure kids today feel like, 20 years from now they'll be like, oh, them 2024 games, nothing beats those. And I ain't gonna try to say one's right over the other. We all have our own memories and stuff. My memories of a little 8-bit Mario game being like one of the best of all time. Someone will look at that as playing some Call of Duty game today and they'll be like, are you kidding me? You can't hardly see, it's so blocky. But then again, I thought some of the Atari games from the 70s were just so, like, people spent hundreds of dollars on this thing to watch a ball bounce across the screen. But a couple of games that came out around that time I never had any experience with. Now, I'll mention some things I've never had experience with, just so that, because I don't want to make this just my stuff. These two games are called Master of Magic and System Shock for MS-DOS. DOS. I think DOS is how you pronounce it. MS-DOS was a precursor to Windows. It was made by Microsoft and it was run off the floppy disks. It was the original operating system for Windows, and you could play games on it, basic games. Like I said, I have no experience with those games, but the one game that came out that month that I had a lot of experience with and a lot of people have played is Mortal Kombat 2 for Super Nintendo. Now, Mortal Kombat 2 had already come out for Genesis, and they weren't sure they were going to put it out for Nintendo because if any of you remember, the first Mortal Kombat that came out for Sega Genesis, the blood and the fatalities, that was huge. But when it came out for Super Nintendo, of course, being Nintendo, they were more kid-friendly. They didn't have the blood and the fatalities, and it bombed. I mean, people still bought it, but they were not happy. Yeah, you got to have those things in a Mortal Kombat game. So the second one, they actually released it with that stuff, and didn't sell as well as the Genesis because the Genesis game came out first, and there was also people probably still kind of leery. You're buying a game for something that came out for another system. You want the whole game. But it sold $1.5 million in just the U.S., or 1.5 million games in just the U.S. of Mortal Kombat, of just the Super Nintendo. That's how hot video games were then. I can't say enough about that. Of course, my favorite character was Sub-Zero on there. But there's so many iconic characters from that. Just a really fun game. Back when fighting games were simple, you just had a few buttons. Whether you memorized the combos or you just mashed buttons, you could play it. Of course, the better players would memorize. I was never a better player. As much as I love video games, I will say I wasn't the best at them. There are not many games I've beaten. I've beaten Sonic Adventures and Sonic Adventures 2 for Dreamcast with the help of my wife. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever beaten a game on my own, but I love playing them. We got another feature here on the podcast. We go back and look at kind of a TV lineup. I've done Nickelodeon lineups. Last week I did Saturday morning cartoon lineup, and I kind of wanted to do that again because last week we did, like I said, April of '97. Now this is September of '94, so that's roughly a year and a half later. Or 2.5 years later. I actually did good in school in math. You wouldn't know it, but we're going to look at September 24th of 1994, and the three networks that had the Saturday morning cartoons were ABC, CBS, and Fox. Now, I purposely don't look at these lists before I go into them because I want to just give my opinions. So I may not know a cartoon and just kind of move on. If it's something you really love, I promise I'm not trying to dismiss the cartoon. I just don't have experience with it. Like on ABC, we started 8 in the morning with Crow, C-R-O. I've never heard of this. Then at 8:30, Sonic the Hedgehog. I love those Sonic cartoons. I didn't find out till later that the guy that Jaleel White, who played Steve Urkel, obviously iconic in Family Matters. I use that word iconic too much, I think. I'm going to try to stop using that. If I use it for everything, then everything's an icon, and that means nothing's an icon. But anyway, I never found out till later that he did the voice of Sonic. I didn't have a Genesis growing up. I got one when I was a teenager, after it had already been out. Like, I had the Sega Genesis 3. It was the third model of it, so it was real stripped down, but it was... By the way, I found out that video game systems that come out, they re-release versions of them, are better. Like the PS3, the second version was better. The same with the PS2. The PS4, we've had two that died, like, quickly. The one we're on now was released later on, the kind that doesn't have the shiny top to it, and it's been going 5 or 6 years working perfectly. But anyway, back to Sonic the Hedgehog. The cartoon was funny. He was obsessed with chili dogs. And no, I didn't call my dog named Chili. Chili dog. Next, Free Willy. I don't remember a Free Willy cartoon. Huh. They made a lot of cartoons based on movies back in the 90s. I mean, Beetlejuice I covered a couple weeks ago, or maybe even last week. They even had an Ace Ventura cartoon, I mean. And we ate them up. Like, oh, that's based on a movie, let's watch it. It usually didn't have the same voices, didn't have nothing to do with it other than the character. But yeah, I've never seen Free Willy cartoon. Reboot, never heard of this either. Bump in the Night. There's a picture on here. It's kind of like weird looking monster. They kind of look like an real monster ripoff. But if it's not and I'm wrong, I apologize. Oh, 10:30. Tales from the Crypt Keeper. Yeah, so many memories of that cartoon. I mean, the theme song's a little bit different in it too. Cause like I said, the Crypt Keeper they made for kids. The theme song's a little bit different, but it's catchy. But I've already talked about that. I don't want to make this the Tales from the Crypt podcast, which I may do someday. 11. This has become a recurring theme on this show. The Bugs Bunny and Tweety Show. There is so many versions of the Looney Tunes characters and their own shows that it's like comical. Like last week I was talking about the Daffy Duck Mysteries. This is the Bugs Bunny and Tweety Show. I don't know what makes it Bugs Bunny and Tweety and the other characters not important, but it was their show. Then at 11:55, okay, for 5 minutes, I guess they needed a break before the next show. Schoolhouse Rock. I'm Just a Bill. Oh, I remember that one. Watching that in school. If you've ever seen the Schoolhouse Rock, they would show it in school. It would just, it was made for like entertainment, but it was also, you can tell it was made for school. This is about how a bill becomes a law. They parodied this on The Simpsons. But then at noon, the Addams Family cartoon. I only watched that a few times, but I remember liking it. You know, like I said, and that came on at noon. Like I said, I don't have too many memories of it. I just remember like on then that some of them have fleeting memories. Some I can go on 2 hours about. We'll move on to CBS, which 8 o'clock, The Little Mermaid. I'd never seen that cartoon. This must have been before Disney and ABC were linked because this is on CBS. Then at 8:30, Beethoven. I never remember a Beethoven cartoon. Then 9 and 9:30 or 9 o'clock, they had Aladdin. I remember that cartoon. That had just come out that year. So there's a lot of stuff that was based on movies, like Disney in particular. They even had a Hercules cartoon. Hercules was the teenager. That was later on though. 9:30, Garfield in Paradise. I don't remember that. I remember Garfield and Friends, the classic late 80s, early 90s cartoon. I've never heard of Garfield in Paradise. Oh, here we go. From 10 to 11, 2 episodes of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The original one that started in the 80s. Man, I got so many memories about that cartoon. Of course, another one like Urkel played or did the voice of Sonic. I found out later that the guy that did the voice of Uncle Phil, or not the voice, he played Uncle Phil in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, did the voice of the Shredder, which I didn't realize it, but then once I found out, I listened, I was like, oh yeah. But yeah, if you don't know about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon, so classic. There is a live special live concert of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on tour that when I get to the 1990 when it came out, I will be covering that in length. So many memories with that. But yeah, the Turtles cartoon, of course, Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, Michelangelo. Splinter is the leader. April works for the news, and her little, I can't think of his name, the cameraman. I wanted to say Leslie. That don't sound right. It's going to drive me nuts until I figure out. I remember his name. But yeah, the main bad guys were, of course, Shredder and Krang in this Technodrome from Dimension X. The little brain in the robot suit. And, of course, Bebop and Rocksteady. Two of the biggest idiots ever. I think they copied them in Power Rangers later when they had their enemies because they were just dumb. But speaking of Garfield and Friends, 2 episodes of that would come on from 10 to 11:30, or 10 to, or if I can talk, 11 to 12. Of course, Garfield and Friends. You had the main cartoon with Garfield and Odie and all Garfield's lazy adventures, but then you would have like the Friends portion of it would be these animals on the farm. So it was like you're getting 2 cartoons in one, and of course, being 15 minutes apiece, you never really got tired of it. Noon, Beakman's World. I've never seen that. I've heard of it, but I've never watched Beakman's World. Let me know if Beakman's World is something I should check out. Okay, Fox. 8 o'clock, Dog City. Never heard of it. 8:30, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I'm going to get into the original series of that, but I own the original ones on DVD. Maybe I'll review them someday. I mean, they're cheesy, but back then Power Rangers was everything. You had the action figures. I had a board game of the Power Rangers where you would set it all up, and that was so much fun. 9 o'clock, Animaniacs. See, this was before the WB. Last week when I covered Saturday morning cartoons, WB had their own network. This is before then. So Animaniacs was on Fox. And of course, crazy cartoon. Talked about them last week. Extravaganza. I remember that barely. I don't have too many memories of it, but I know of it. Oh, here we go. 10 o'clock. The Adventures of Batman and Robin. Of course, the Batman the Animated Series was my all-time favorite, but The Adventures of Batman and Robin was good too. Back in the 90s, we were spoiled with Batman. It's completely different in my opinion today than the Batmans they have where they try to be more serious. Back then, the 90s Batman movies, they were serious, but you can tell that they were trying to add humor into it. They weren't. Nowadays, Batman just seems like a depressed guy that lost his parents. And like I said, back then, the Batman cartoons were super popular. Like I said, my favorite was Batman Animated Series. But 10:30, Where on Earth is Carmen Sandiego? Season finale, it says. I didn't watch this too much. I watched Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, which was the game show on PBS, where they'd have the little kids come in to play detectives and try to find where Carmen Sandiego was. I didn't have much experience with the cartoon. And 11 o'clock, X-Men. I talked about this last week. Like, I don't like any of the X-Men stuff now. Of course, I never got into any comic books, but I was always watching the X-Men cartoon back in the 90s. And then at 11:30, The Tick. Again, one of those ones I remember but didn't have a ton of memories with. I said, sorry if some of this seems boring to you. Like, I don't have memories of this. But I'm not going to pretend I knew something and look up some information and be like, oh, remember this? Because I don't want to be fake on here. And if I'm an idiot and don't remember some of these cartoons or don't know some of these things and they're like a big deal to you, like, that's my memories and that's your memories. You'll see on my top 50 horror list, I guarantee you the number one movie, probably 99% of you on that have never seen. But anyway, that's another podcast. And that was the Saturday morning cartoon lineup. And I'm going to go back here. Again, I've mentioned before, I don't have a script. I have an outline. So if you see me looking at stuff, I'm not like reading word for word, obviously. This podcast will be over quickly. But if you know me, huge wrestling fan. WWF didn't have a pay-per-view this month, so it was all about WCW. And truthfully, back then, WCW is what I watched the most. As what I could find on cable the most. TBS was always on, so we were always watching WCW Saturday Night, which was the main show at this time. This was before Nitro. And their pay-per-view that month, which I didn't watch, was Fall Brawl, which is, of course, known for the War Games match. But on this show, Johnny B. Bad, who some of you might know as Mark Marrow from later on, but I always loved him best when he was Johnny B. Bad. He came out with a bad blaster. He would shoot confetti. It was basically a confetti cannon. But he defeated Lord Steven Regal, of course now known as William Regal, for the World TV title. And I talked about how important that TV title was last week. But here's something that kind of really changed the way the business was going. A couple things on this show. First, Kevin Sullivan defeated Cactus Jack in a loser leaves WCW match. And that was when Cactus Jack was leaving WCW and went to ECW, and then later would go to WWF as Mankind. And you've seen how that turned out, how that completely changed the business. But not just that, but also on this night, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, one of Hogan's friends he brought in, would first of all, before I get into that, Ricky Steamboat had suffered his back injury that ended his career. I mean, he's had a couple matches, later on, but his career was over pretty much after that back injury. And he was the U.S. champion at the time. He forfeited the title because he had to Steve Austin. It was kind of a way to get heat on Steve. He didn't win the title. He had to take it by forfeit. But like I was just getting ready to talk about, one of Hogan's friends that he brought in when he signed with WCW in '94, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, which was, in the '80s, Hacksaw Jim Duggan was a huge name, but by '94 he was kind of past his prime and kind of out of shape. He was still over a little bit, but he came in and defeated Steve Austin in 30 seconds to win the title. Completely buried Steve, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinions. But that wasn't when Austin's career was over. It was just kind of like he'd seen the writing on the wall, and then, of course, famously later he'd get fired by FedEx by Eric Bischoff when he was injured. But like I said, between Cactus Jack, Mankind, Mick Foley, Dude Love, whatever you want to call him leaving WCW, and then kind of the decline of Steve Austin, kind of him seeing where the company was heading, and he wasn't going to be factored in. Austin and Foley are two huge names from the WWF Attitude Era that helped take over WCW once they started winning the ratings war. So, like I said, that was kind of a pivotal night, whether WCW realized it or not. But anyway, the main event was, of course, War Games. Now, if you don't know much about wrestling, War Games is a cage match. You got two rings, and then there's a cage that surrounds them both. And then there's two teams. Usually it's teams of 4. And back in the old days, and I think the WWE does this now, but it'd be one at a time. 2 people start, and then they'd flip a coin. Somehow the bad guys always won the coin toss. But then there'd be an advantage. Like the bad guys would get a second guy in. Then the good guy. It would alternate till everybody was in, and then they call it the match beyond, where you only win by giving up, basically. There was no pins, there was no disqualifications, obviously. But anyway, on this night, it was Dusty Rhodes and his son Dustin Rhodes teaming with the Nasty Boys to take on the Stud Stable, which consisted of Terry Funk, obvious legend, Arn Anderson, one of my favorites, 4 Horsemen, obviously, Bunkhouse Buck. I don't remember much about him other than just being the 90's. One of those guys in WCW. And Colonel Robert Parker was hilarious to me. I remember him most from having to face Flying Brian Pillman and a loser has to wear a chicken suit contest. But I love Colonel Robert Parker. He was so hilarious. One of my favorite managers and characters of all time. But then the following week, I said that was Fall Brawl. The following week, because I kind of want to give title results to, just kind of put some historical context on what I'm talking about. The Stars and Stripes, which is a team of Buff Bagwell, as you know him now. He was Marcus Alexander Bagwell then. He teamed with the Patriot to defeat Pretty Wonderful, which was Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff, and Paul Roma. Defeated them to win the WCW Tag Team titles. And couple other things that happened this month. Billy Kidman, which would become a huge cruiserweight name in the late 90s and early 2000s in WCW and WWE. Billy Kidman made his pro debut that month. And also, September 1st, Boris Malenko, Dean Malenko's dad, passed away. So, of course, Dean was one of the Four Horsemen, but probably one of the most surprising guys to ever win the PWI 500 Wrestler of the Year. Back when it was taken a little more seriously. That's how big he got. Just a short guy, and he wasn't a typical cruiserweight. He was technical, but the fans never found him boring. He just had something special about him, known as the Iceman. One of my favorites of all time. I guess while we're talking about wrestling, we'll talk about some sports. September, you think we're getting to the end of the baseball season, we're going to find out who makes the playoffs. Nope. September 14th, the Major League Baseball owners voted to end the season. And there'll be no World Series because of the strike and the labor issues. This is only the second time in history there was no World Series since the World Series started. But yeah, that season is known as pushing a lot of baseball fans away because it was just seen as players and owners and teams all being money hungry and the fans all suffered. Especially to end it that time of year when they've been playing all year and fans are really into it. We're getting to the last month. We're going to find out who's going to make the playoffs. And to pull something like that, yeah, it took a long time. It took the late 90s, really the battle with Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire for the home run record to really start bringing fans back because fans were not happy. But of course, September is also a big month because the NFL season started. And I was surprised to learn, this was the first year that 2-point conversions were made a thing. And of course, the first one is scored against the Bengals by the Browns, because of course. I'm wearing my Bengals hat now. Said something earlier about them losing yesterday. We got beat by the Eagles. We got killed by the Eagles. And we weren't doing any better this year. We started the year 0-3, but the leaders after the first month of action of football, the Chargers went 4-0. Of course, they would ultimately lose the Super Bowl to the 49ers. And the Giants were 3-0, which didn't make the Super Bowl, but started off to a good year. I started talking a little bit about NASCAR last month. I don't watch current NASCAR, and I didn't watch it this time. I kind of watched from like 2001 to Jeff Gordon retired. I've already told that story. Anyway, few race results. Bill Elliott won the Mountain Dew. I always like to look at these old race names just to see the sponsors. Bill Elliott won the Mountain Dew Southern 500 at Darlington. Terry Labonte, I always remember him driving the Cornflakes car, but he won the Miller Genuine Draft 400 at Richmond. None of these people sponsor the show, by the way. If you want to sponsor it, go ahead. Please, I need some money. But Rusty Wallace won the other two races that month, the Spitfire Sparkplug 500 at Dover and the Goodies 500 at Martinsville. And of course, I've already mentioned this 2 podcasts ago. Dale Earnhardt would win his record tying with Richard Petty, the record tying 7th championship later on that year. But, yeah, kind of wanted to give the wrestling and the sports together there. But I'm going to kind of change subjects here and just kind of talk about what I would do during this time period as a kid on the weekend. I've made mention of my stepdad in the past. We didn't really have a lot of freedom. Like, we never went to people's houses. I remember literally one time as a kid, unless I'm going after school before I get home, sneaking there. Remember one time as a kid I was allowed to go to a friend's house. It didn't last long. But, so we were around the house, but, we made the most of it. Still a lot of fun we had, but I always start Saturday off, I would always be sent up to UDF. If you don't know what that is, United Dairy Farmers. The greatest chocolate malts in the world. Still is. Anytime I go there, even though it takes 15-20 minutes waiting in line, my wife's annoyed sitting in the car, usually hot because it's normally the summer when we get to visit. But, yeah, UDF, I was always sent up there. It was 2 or 3 blocks, maybe 4 away, and depending on the time, I either rode my bike or walked. But I'd always be sent up there for a newspaper and to get breakfast. And I would always get the Hostess, I think it was Hostess, I don't want to get the name wrong. I think it was Hostess. The cherry rolls, the cherry sweet rolls, which have been discontinued. I signed a petition to bring these things back. It's how much I loved them. But I would get those, or the cinnamon rolls if they didn't have them. Me and my brothers would share them. Back when it was me, Josh, and Travis. At this time, Clint was, let's see, only 3 months old, so he wasn't eating no rolls then. But I usually get 2 of these, and we'd share them. Like I said, just great memories. And it's funny, I would walk up to the store, didn't have anything to listen to, so I'd always entertain myself. I would be looking at the money. My wife will tell you this. I'm like, it's because of this time is why I do this. But if I have time where I have money, I'll just sit and I'll organize it. I'll organize it by year, and then if the years are the same, I'll go by the serial numbers. Like, I know, strange ways of entertaining myself. But, yeah, we'd get home and we'd watch cartoons in the morning and usually be outside playing, depending on whether the weather was good or if we were grounded, which happened all the time. We'd find kind of ways to entertain ourselves. We'd be playing like a kickball in the street with the neighbors or just with ourselves if that's all we had. Remember we played baseball in the backyard. It made me so mad. Corny boy, I'm talking to you, my brother Josh. I call him Corny boy. We would play baseball, and it would just usually be me and him because Travis was too young and didn't really want to play. He was inside scheming how he can get money for Marky Foe. Let me go back to Marky Foe would hide a remote. They would do this purposely, and I know it. I can't prove it in a court of law, but I know it. They would hide a remote and tell Travis where it was and offered like $5 or 50 cents or something to find the remote, and then he'd tell Travis where it's at and he'd go right to it. It was like, what is the point of that? The 50 cents reference was Travis swore I stole his 50 cents, and he would annoyingly sit there, I want my 50 cents, I want my 50 cents, over and over and over. It's like, I didn't even take your 50 freaking cents. He accused me later of taking his $20, I didn't take that either. Anyway, back to baseball with Josh. The only time I could get him to play is if he got to bat first. And I always knew what would happen, but I did it anyway, hoping the outcome would be different. I would pitch to him, and we'd have back then. If you're just playing one-on-one baseball, obviously you have ghost runners. But I'd pitch to him, and I finally get him out. Then it'd be my turn to bat. Oh, he wants to play something else. Little bastard. You're not really. I'm just kidding. But that made me so mad. But I always fell for it because I was like, maybe I'll get a chance to bat. But we do stuff like this stupid little stuff like it was back in the 90s, back when it was popular in the stores. You go to the back to the deli and you take a number. So we'd play this stupid thing called deli table, where we'd have these rocks and we'd use his big wheel to grind them up into little pieces and act like we're selling, like, take a number. I mean, just dumb stuff that was entertaining us for hours. We'd do stuff with the neighbors. My dog's screaming in the background for no reason. Speaking of the neighbors and dogs, actually, that is kind of funny. We had a weenie dog named Larry. I miss that dog so much. It was the first dachshund I've ever had. I got a bunch of them now. Well, they're kind of half dachshunds. But anyway, he ran out the door, and he didn't run out often, but we were afraid because we were right on a road that would sometimes get busy, depending on time of day. But the neighbor was coming home next door, and he was running towards it, and I could, in my head, I seen the neighbor killing my dog. So I ran as fast as I could, picked him up, and the neighbor ran over my foot. And the weirdest thing about it was it didn't hurt. Like, I thought for sure somebody runs over your foot with a van, it's going to hurt, but it didn't. But anyway, that's just some of the stuff we did. I'll get into more of it later on when I think of it. Sometimes and I can only think of a little bit at a time. But kind of want to get into movies. kind of like with some of the TV shows or some of the cartoons we talked about earlier. There's 5 movies that came out in September of '94, and only one I know, and I know it well. But the 4 that I don't really know, you might have memories of them. If you want to leave in the comments, whether you thought it was good or not. Terminal Velocity, never heard of it. River Wild, might have heard of it. The Scout, I don't know if I've heard of. Ed Wood, I've heard of, but I've never watched it. But the movie that came out that month that is still one of my huge movies and ones I quote a lot. A quote from it that I like the most is, get busy living or get busy dying. That is Stephen King's The Shawshank Redemption. That was a movie that I'd come to learn later from listening to commentaries and documentaries on the movie that it didn't do well in the theaters at all. It was only once it was released to tape in video stores. Of course, back then, Blockbuster ruled. That's where you got all your entertainment from. If you didn't have cable, you go to Blockbuster. But thanks to Blockbuster, it became one of those classic movies over time. Because it was a weird title, The Shawshank Redemption. Like, what does that even mean? So, just going by the title, you wouldn't think to even see it. But once word of mouth got out, it really became an instant classic once it hit videotapes. No DVDs then. But it's a Stephen King story, which many people were surprised because there's no monsters. But it's about this banker that gets framed for murdering his wife and her lover that she had, and gets life in prison. And I said he's a banker, so he's smart, and he starts doing the guards' taxes. And then, of course, the warden sees that and is like, oh, how can I be greedy off this? And then uses him to fix the books so he can steal money. But it's a really good story. Like there's so much in that movie. Like, not just the iconic scene, or go with the word iconic again, but it really is, of him breaking out of prison and then him finally getting out at the end, covered in all this crap, literal crap, and and it's raining and it's just looking up and it's like he finally has freedom. Even though, see, in the movie, a guy came in that could prove that he didn't kill his wife because he'd heard the actual killer telling the story. But the warden didn't want him getting out. So he did everything he could to keep him in there, including putting him in solitary confinement for 2 months. But it's just a story about, it's a prison story, of course, but there's just so many elements to it. Like, you watch that movie as a kid, that's where you first learn what institutionalized means. Like, everybody remembers the scene where Brooks hangs himself after he gets out of prison. He carves Brooks was here into the beam above the chair. That was a sad scene. Of course, Morgan Freeman played Red in this, and to me, this is where Morgan Freeman became like one of those legendary actors. Just his performance in this, and his monologue in it. But there's so much to like about that movie. Like, I own the special edition DVD, of course. But it was just a short little story in a Stephen King short story thing that they made into this 2-hour-long epic of a movie. And if you haven't seen The Shawshank Redemption, I highly recommend it. So it's not a killer clown chasing people or pets coming back from a cemetery from the dead. It's, this could have happened. And this shows the real versatility of Stephen King. Speaking of that, I'm wondering if maybe I should go back and look to see what months and years his books in the 90s were released, so I can, if you guys want to hear me talk about any of the Stephen King books, then maybe add that as a feature on here. There won't be too many of those because it's not like he released a book every month or something. So maybe that's something to talk about in the future, and maybe I can compare it to movies, because a lot of his books were turned into movies. That's something I can kind of think about for the future. But I talked about my weekend experiences as a kid. I want to kind of talk about my experiences in school, because like I was talking about at the beginning, this was my first year in 6th grade. And our school was called middle school. A lot of them are called junior high. Ours was called middle school. And depending on the school, elementary school either ends after the 5th or 6th grade. Our school went to 5th grade. 6th grade was at the middle school. And it was, like I talked about before, it was a mile to the school from our house. The middle school and the high school were connected because the middle school was put in where the high school used to be. So they were connected by this little bridge. But anyway, so I was used to my little elementary school like 8 blocks away. This is a big school, and this had, I lived in Norwood at the time, and my elementary school was Norwood View, and they had all the other elementary schools though. They had 5 or 6 elementary schools in Norwood. So everybody went into middle school, so you get the people you know, but then you get all these other people, and it's so overwhelming. I'm sure a lot of you remember that. A lot of like if you're from a small town, you probably don't have that same experience because it's usually one elementary school and then you all go into the middle school or junior high together. This was like I said, 5 or 6 schools coming together, and you haven't seen any of these people because they're from different. Us, obviously, we never left the yard hardly, but even if we had, it was different. Norwood was a pretty big area, so you have all these different kids that you'd never seen before, and all these different, and it's a lot to take in. And of course, me being, as I went through school, I would get like less and less social. Like in elementary school, I was annoying. I will admit that. I did everything I could for attention. Like they were talking about humpback whales in freaking 5th grade, and I literally got sent home because I couldn't stop making comments. That's how annoying I was. I got sent home half the day because obviously the comments about humpback whales you can imagine. But yeah, middle school. This is where it really started, where I just kind of kept to myself. I did go to the school dance, which turned out to be a huge mistake. Didn't get anybody to dance with me. Marky Fo, I was wanting to go, like everybody else was just, nobody dressed fancy. I was just want to wear my normal clothes. Marky Fo had me dress up in his fancy dress shirt and these fancy pants. If I had a suit jacket and a tie, he would have made me wear that. So I stood there, me and my friend from elementary school, Mike. We were the only 2 that dressed up for this stupid thing, and we're the only 2 standing there all night watching everybody dance. It was horrible, but just depending on which way I walked to school, I'm gonna save some of this for later. I had some stuff I had some points I wanted to make about some different stuff along the way to school, but it's getting kind of long, and some of this stuff really wasn't in 6th grade, so I'll kind of save it. Just me walking to school, and then during the summer we would purposely go to this store called Media Play just to play the Mario game they had in the Game Boy. Like we would just go there just to play that all day. The people there had to have hated us, but I'll save some of that because it kind of don't go with this. But that dance was humiliating. I said not any friends at all really. It kind of clammed me up really. And I've kind of been like that my whole life. Like, until like the last few years, I haven't really socialized. Now I'm part of group chats, and I'll be like starting conversations and really coming out of my shell. But this is 6th grade is really where it started to. I mean, obviously you're going through puberty and all them changes too. They mess with your head. But really 6th grade and especially that freaking dance. I never went to another dance until I got into 9th grade after I moved state away, if that tells you anything. But kind of got one more topic to talk about here, and we'll kind of move along quickly. I know I'm getting long as always. Music. Of course, wrestling and music, my 2 things. I always mention that. And when I did the November of 94 podcast, I talked about how the number 1 song for Billboard was the Boyz II Men, I'll Make Love to You. Had been like number 1 for 16 weeks. Well, it was number 1 all through this month, so we've already talked about it. And I don't want to gloss over that fact, though. I mean, 16 weeks at number 1, that's unheard of these days. And I'm surprised that's a group that didn't like stay around making hits longer than they did, because they don't get near enough credit. Like I said, I didn't listen to anything other than country then, but they don't get near enough credit for the times at number one. And I mean, back then it wasn't just number one because you knew somebody. It was because people were buying your records. But we'll get into the country charts. 3 songs went to number one that month. Randy Travis, "Whisper My Name," great song. This was kind of when Randy's career, like his peak, being, the guy in country, was kind of coming to an end, which always sucks when you look back and see that he wasn't having as many hits. But "Whisper My Name" was a good song, and like one of his last number ones, not the last, but one of them. And then 2 weeks at number one was Trisha Yearwood's "X's and O's." This is a fun little song. Of course, Trisha Yearwood, now known as being Garth Brooks' wife. But this was when, of course, her biggest song will always be her first, "She's in Love with the Boy." But this is kind of, she was on a roll with this song. She'd had a few number ones in a row, and her career was really going in a good direction. And then the last number one of that month was Joe Diffie, "Third Rock from the Sun." Of course, Joe's passed on. He died, I think, of COVID. I think in 2020. I think that's what he died from. One of those tragic things. He had such an amazing voice. My favorite of his will always be "Is It Cold in Here?" That is the definition of country music. You listen to that, you want to know what country music is really about. You want to get around the gimmicks of people today, or the "oh, my dog came back" and play the country song backwards cliche. If you want to get to what country music is, you listen to "Is It Cold in Here?" The emotion of that song. Anyway, that's not this song. This song is "Third Rock from the Sun." It's about aliens. Or they think it's aliens. He was known for a lot of novelty songs, but they weren't like cheap songs you don't think about. Like, this is still played. I've heard this on the radio whenever I happen to be listening to it sometimes. If they play the older stuff, I'll hear this. It's about stuff that goes on in a small town. It's literally, it says in the chorus, a chain of events. And it has nothing to do with the Third Rock from the Sun TV show, which I did not like. But it does mention aliens in it, so I had to say that. And one more thing, this month of November, I'm going back 2 weeks. September, Tracy Lawrence released his "I See It Now" CD. I think that was his 3rd album, or maybe his 4th. I can't remember, but it was one of those original 4 albums where he was big. Has a lot of those great songs. Like I said, he was. And then, of course, as with all artists, they have their huge initial run, but this was like either the 3rd or the 4th in that. Tracy Lawrence is one that doesn't get near enough credit. He was just boom, 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 hit after hit after hit. And then, another thing he doesn't get credit for is he really put a lot of creative into his videos. Like, if you go back and watch, in chronological order, not all of his videos, but most of his videos, he was, playing this time traveler. So he would, go into the story, of either the story be based around the song, or if the song didn't really match it, it was kind of another story, but the song kind of went with it. But at the end, he would always, jump into this next life. It was kind of, reminding me of Quantum Leap. But really ahead of its time. Like I said, if you go back and look at the order they're released, watch them chronologically, you'll really see a story there. But we're kind of winding up the podcast now. Again, thank you for checking it out. Please leave comments and feedback. I heard last week from someone saying, well, the 90s really wasn't the time that I was around, but you did a good job on the podcast. And thank you for that, sincerely. Because I realize that a lot of you watching this didn't grow up in the 90s. If you don't grow up as a kid or a teenager during a time period, you don't get the same feeling as you do other times. This person said they were raising kids and having a job, and you have different memories of times when you're busy doing that than versus times when you're in school. So if this podcast is for you and you like it, I'm glad. If it's not your time period but you still took the time to watch it, thank you. And I'm not going to be fake and do a podcast about the 70s or something, time I didn't live through, because it would just be all research, and I don't want to. I do a little bit of research so that way I can, get my facts right, but I want to just kind of go off the top of my head about stuff. It makes it more interesting if somebody's telling their feelings versus a history lesson. This isn't U.S. history class, but please let me know any feedback. I want to hear it all, because I want to improve this, because I really enjoy doing this, and even if nobody watches it, it's still a fun thing for me to do. But obviously I hope a lot of you watch it. Next time we're going to move ahead 4 years in the future, and we're going to go to December of 1998. At that time I would have been turning 15 that month, so that's a huge difference between now and then. I was in high school then, and we'll be talking about everything that went on in December of 1998 that year. Again, if you're wherever you're watching us at, thank you for watching, or if you're listening on Spotify, let me know all your comments, and depending on when this comes out, check out the bonus episode, Top 50 Horror Movies. Hope you enjoy that one as well. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you next time.
Tales from the 90's never die. In our hearts they testify. VCRs and mixtape spins, where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars.